The first rays of dawn stretched lazily over the horizon, painting my fields in shades of gold and amber. It was one of those mornings where everything felt still, like the world had paused for a deep breath before the day began. I took a sip of my black coffee, its warmth cutting through the crisp morning air as I looked out over the freshly tilled rows of soil. Life on the farm wasn't easy, but it was honest, simple, predictable. That is, until the day Karen moved into the new subdivision across the road. If there's one thing I've learned in my 52 years on this earth, it's that peace never lasts long when an HOA Karen shows up in your neighborhood. Karen was the self-appointed queen of the Homeowners Association, a woman who carried a clipboard like it was a sword, issuing violations as if they were royal decrees. The HOA didn't technically have jurisdiction over my property. My farm had been here for 3 generations, long before their cookie-cutter houses sprouted up across the road. But that didn't stop her from trying. The first time I met her, she marched right up to my porch uninvited. She wore oversized sunglasses, bright red lipstick, and an expression that said she'd never been told no in her life. "You need to repaint your barn," she'd said without so much as a greeting. "Ma'am," I replied slowly, "this ain't part of your HOA." She'd smiled tightly. "All land visible from our community must maintain a certain standard." "It's in the bylaws," I'd laughed. "Your bylaws don't cross that fence." She'd walked off in a huff, muttering about community values and property aesthetics. That was months ago. Since then, she'd made it her personal mission to make my life miserable, sending letters, calling the county inspector, even complaining about the smell of my livestock. But today she went too far. When I walked down my gravel driveway that morning, ready to haul a load of hay into town, I stopped dead in my tracks. Parked right across the exit was a gleaming white Lexus SUV, angled perfectly to block both lanes. It looked freshly washed, the sun glinting off its polished chrome, and on the license plate frame, engraved in gold letters, were the words, H.O., a president, K-A-R-E-N-L. I set my coffee cup on the hood of my truck and took a long breath. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she didn't realize she'd blocked me in. But deep down, I knew better. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. She'd made sure every neighbor had it for emergencies. The line rang twice before she answered in her usual tone of false politeness. "Karen speaking." "Hey, Karen. This your white Lexus blocking my driveway?" She paused as if considering whether to admit it. Then with a sigh said, "Oh yes. I had an HOA board meeting early this morning. There weren't any open spots left in our lot, so I had to park somewhere. You don't mind, do you?" I clenched my jaw. "Actually, I do. I need to get my tractor out." "Well," she said sweetly, "the meeting shouldn't take long. Maybe an hour. Just be patient." I felt my patience slipping away. "Karen, this is private property. You're trespassing." "That road borders the HOA community," she replied smugly. "Technically, it's under our regulatory authority." "You should be thanking me for keeping it clean." She hung up before I could reply. I stood there for a long moment, staring at that shiny Lexus gleaming like a smug insult at the end of my driveway. I could have called the sheriff, but I knew how those calls went. Paperwork, waiting, and a slap on the wrist for her. Number. Karen needed to understand something today. Something she clearly hadn't learned in all her life. Actions have consequences. I walked back to my barn and fired up my old John Deere tractor. The engine roared to life, shaking the ground under my boots. The sound carried across the fields, deep and powerful. It wasn't just a machine, it was a statement. The morning sun glinted off its green metal as I drove it slowly toward the driveway. The air was cool, but my blood ran hot. My neighbors had started peeking out their windows, some even stepping out onto their porches. They knew Karen. Everyone did. And every one of them had their own story about her HOA inspections or her friendly reminders. As I reached the end of the driveway, I stopped a few feet behind her SUV. The polished rear bumper reflected the massive front tires of my tractor like a mirror. I climbed down, grabbed a heavy-duty steel tow chain, and wrapped it around her rear axle with careful precision. I wasn't planning to destroy her car, just to make a point. After securing the hook to the tractor hitch, I climbed back into the cab and took a deep breath. The world seemed to go quiet for a second, the only sound the wind rustling through the crops. Then I eased the throttle forward. The chain went taut with a loud clang, and the Lexus gave a stubborn jerk. The tires squealed, skidding slightly on the gravel. I increased the power, the engine growling deeper now. The SUV shifted, its front tires lifting ever so slightly before the entire thing started sliding, slowly but steadily, off the driveway. Gravel flew in all directions as the tractor's massive wheels dug into the dirt. I could hear the metallic creak of resistance as the Lexus tilted. Then, with a dull whoomp, it dropped into the muddy ditch beside the driveway. The front end sank halfway into the muck, the rear tires still spinning uselessly in the air. I stopped the tractor, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment, listening to the silence that followed. A few birds fluttered away from the nearby fence post. I could feel my heartbeat slowing, my frustration melting into something far more satisfying. Justice. When I climbed down, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered at the edge of the road. A couple of them tried to hide their grins. Old Mr. Parker, from 2 houses down, gave me a nod, the kind only an old farmer could give, a mix of respect and quiet amusement. That's when I heard her. The shrill sound of Karen's voice tore through the morning air like a banshee. She was running, yes, actually running, down the road in her bathrobe and slippers, her hair a frizzy mess. "What did you do to my car?" she screeched. I turned slowly to face her, leaning against the tractor tire with my arms crossed. "Morning, Karen," I said casually. "Your car was blocking my driveway." I moved it, her face twisted in disbelief. You flipped it into a ditch." I took a sip from my coffee cup, which I'd retrieved from my truck hood. "Looks more like it slid. Maybe you should invest in better tires." She started shouting threats, calling the police, the HOA board, her lawyer. "You're done. I'll have your property seized. You can't do this to me." "Actually," I said, "you can't do this to me." That's the difference. Her words dissolved into furious sputtering. I walked past her, tractor rumbling softly as I parked it back in the barn. Behind me, she stood helplessly at the edge of the ditch, staring down at her once pristine SUV, now coated in mud and humiliation. As I headed back inside, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. Calm, steady, satisfied. For the first time in months, I felt like I'd reclaimed a little peace. Karen wanted control. She wanted power. But she forgot one thing. Out here, land teaches you respect, or it humbles you. By noon, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. Word spread fast that Karen's SUV had been flipped into a ditch by the farmer across the road. People came by pretending to check mailboxes or walk dogs, but I knew they just wanted to see the scene. The SUV sat there, tilted at a comical angle, its back tires still spinning lazily in the air. Karen's husband eventually arrived, red-faced and embarrassed. He tried to reason with me, but I stood my ground. "She's been trespassing, harassing, and blocking property for months," I warned her. This was the consequence. The police showed up later that afternoon. 2 deputies, both locals who'd known me for years, listened to Karen's furious ranting as she demanded my arrest. When they asked me what happened, I told them the truth, plain and simple. She parked on private property without permission. I moved the obstruction safely with my tractor. The deputies inspected the scene, exchanged a knowing glance, and then turned to Karen. "Ma'am, this driveway is an HOA property. You were parked illegally." Karen's mouth dropped open. But he flipped my car." One of the deputies shrugged. "You blocked his exit." Frankly, he was kinder than most folks would have been. Karen's shrieking turned to threats. "You'll all regret this." "I'm filing a lawsuit." But as her husband arranged for a tow truck, even he couldn't hide his humiliation. Over the next few weeks, Karen became quieter. Her HOA patrols stopped appearing on my land, and I didn't receive another violation notice taped to my mailbox. The incident became local legend, a story whispered with laughter at the diner downtown. Then one day, a new note appeared on my fence post. It wasn't a complaint. It was an apology, written in Karen's handwriting. "I shouldn't have parked there. I was wrong. The HOA board has decided to leave your property alone. Please consider this matter settled." I smiled as I read it. Maybe she finally learned that respect isn't given through fake authority. It's earned through understanding boundaries. From that day forward, no one from the HOA ever bothered me again. My driveway stayed clear, my land remained peaceful, and the only rumbling engines I heard were the ones that belonged there. Mine. Karen still drives by occasionally, her new SUV slowing as she passes. But she doesn't wave, and I don't either. Some lessons, after all, don't need to be repeated.